Today, I'm proud to declare that the United States is in the midst of an economic boom, the likes of which the world has never seen before.
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that.
In Developer Diary 227, we are going to be taking a look at the AI. There are a whole host of changes, some of them quite fundamental, that they are talking about in the way that the AI will function. And they're also highlighting something they've not done before, which is how bad the AI was in the past. Stick around for some of that, because it is a little ludicrous, the idiocy that we have been having to deal with on the lower difficulty levels. Instead of facing Skynet, we've been facing WALL-E. And if you enjoy this video, please assimilate that like button. First, they have set out a whole bunch of goals. Now, I'm not actually going to read these out to you. You can have a look at them if you want. They're pretty corporate, to be honest, in the way they are written. They all sound pretty good, and I think they are great if they do them, but there are 7 goals they've got. Brilliant. Anyway, moving on from that, what are they mainly doing in the upcoming November patch? That is going to be an economic script update. But what do I mean by that? So in Stellaris, the AI empires, the way that they operate is generally, well, it's not generally, it is based on a script. That script defines their behavior. Now, previously, and they mention this in the diary, the script was divided into early, mid, and late game. That means, depending on the phase of the game you were in, empires would have different priorities for building different things. And these scripts are not just on a planet by planet basis, it's an empire-wide thing. An example is, for instance, research. At the moment, the AI focuses on research a lot less in the early game, and basically I think it barely builds research buildings, to be quite honest, than in the later stages of the game, in the mid and late game. But what is the issues with this? And they've highlighted some issues actually, and that is this approach does not take into account situations an empire can find itself in, specifically after a war or when a new empire breaks off from an existing one, so after some sort of revolution. In those cases, even if the game phase was in the late game, for these empires, they were in much more of an early game position, but the AI was not able to react to that. The script did not give it any sort of ability to notice the economic position it was in. That is definitely a bad thing, but don't worry, they're going to fix it. Instead of having 3 different economic plans for each phase of the game, they're now going to have a single base plan. This will give the AI more flexibility to react to the various empires' situations, and they will then be relying heavily on the sub-plans inside that base plan. And they've got an example here of early default, middle default plan. Though I think these snips are actually from the current iteration of the game and not the new work they want to do. So these subplans are meant to be an improvement. Why is that? Well, the subplans can be turned on or off. That will mean that depending on the situation the empire finds itself in, it will do something different. So the rationale they've kind of got here was that in order to ensure economic stability and flexibility, the AI shouldn't spend things on kind of resources like research, population growth, defensive modules on star bases, and unity buildings when there are base issues with energy credits, minerals, or food. That kind of thing is what they want the AI to focus on more. Previously, or in the current version of the game, the AI could sometimes prioritize too early things like alloy production, research, and that could lead to big deficits in, or start with some deficits in energy and mineral production, which would then cause an economic death spiral, as eventually it would spiral down to having 0 of those resources and then get the debuffs, but it wouldn't do anything about those debuffs. If you've played on Ensign mode, you've probably seen this, and they've actually got a screenshot here, or should I say a collection of the economic part of the screen for 7 different AI empires 80 years into the game. And I assume this is on the base difficulty, so with no scaling bonuses. And as you can see, the AI was pretty bad. This, if your economy looks like this, pretty much any of these, except I think the 4th one down looks like it's doing all right, but it's both the alloy production and research are quite low, and it doesn't have that many pops, and it's got basically no fleet. But these economies are not the healthiest. A lot of them are having big issues with minor resources, the base resources, economic stability in terms of the trade goods, and lots of buildings use trade goods. That is atrocious across the board, really. There's only a couple that seem to be overproducing. But the current problem they have at the moment is the AI simply doesn't really know how to handle its own economy, apparently. And that's a real problem. You know, that's pretty bad. But there are some fixes for this. If you increase the difficulty level, the AI will get quite big bonuses to energy, mineral production, resource production in general, as well as upkeep of the fleet, all that kind of thing, meaning that they can keep up with you as a player if you're on Grand Admiral, because they aren't having to do the same things as you. They don't have the same hurdles to overcome. So the shift now is going to be to have an income and a focus subsection of these economic plans. I'll show you that on the screen with some code snippets. But basically the way it's going to work is that if the monthly income is below what is defined in the focus block, then districts and buildings which produce those resources get an extra bonus in weight when deciding what to build. Then the first subplan kicks in. There is an example they say if a country uses food, it will prioritize food production, and that's this example here. But they also say something in bracket which I'm a little concerned about, and they've said therefore machine empires will have this subplan turned off. Now I hope they don't mean machine empires with catalytic processing. Otherwise, what they're planning on doing is building an AI which is going to take and make use of the fact that machine empires suffer very little in the way of a malus from having catalytic processing, so making food from alloys, but actually running out of food and not producing any food. So I hope that's not quite what they're talking about here, or I hope they at least troubleshoot this and check it. But we'll have to wait and see. And then they outline a whole bunch of other subplans. Basically, the point here is going to be, is the AI producing enough of a resource? If they're not, then they will attempt to produce more of that. But it's going to start at the basic resources, minerals, energy, maybe food, and then from there work up to the more complex resources, alloys, unity, research, and make sure not to destabilize its core economy before moving to those improvements. How does this affect the behavior of the AI though? Well, prepare yourself. I'm going to show you a GIF that they posted. The resolution is really not very good, but I hope you can attempt to make out at the top. It is quite hard. The point here that they're trying to make is that this is 100 years into the game, and using these AI improvements, the AI is now much better at managing its economy. They are producing a lot more resources. They're basically not in deficit for anything, and the deficits they have are small and they are not at zero. This may be cherry-picked data, absolutely, but it does look to be an improvement if we take this at face value. This example could be quite positive for the health of the AI in future, and of course this is only going to have even more improvements for AI empires on Grand Admiral, meaning Grand Admiral could be about to get scarier and better. You know, if Grand Admiral is currently broken AI plus bonus, what is going to happen when it's reasonable AI plus bonus? That's the question we kind of have to ask ourselves here. What are the final conclusions they've made in this dev diary then? Well, the first one is that in the past, the code for the AI had been heavily optimized to improve performance. This apparently led to some unforeseen and unintended behaviors which have now been corrected. I hope that doesn't mean that they are, by making these improvements, they've reduced the performance, because a lot of people already struggle massively with late game performance issues. If they've reduced the performance of our AI, that might be a problem for some people. I mean, not everybody is playing Stellaris on top of the range PCs. You know, for a long time I was playing on what was basically a potato for many years, and I was still able to enjoy the game, but I would be really hesitant if they're moving away from performance and towards something else, sacrificing that what we already apparently have in terms of performance, which definitely is not the best. There are some key choice statements as well in this. So some of the districts and buildings were not considered at all, and city districts were weighted too high. This line really gets me. The AI is also now able to build temples and holo theaters. The AI is able to build them. That means that until now, the AI was unable to build temples and holotheaters. I mean, I didn't know that. I should have probably noticed. Whenever you conquer a world, it is usually covered in gene clinics of all things. But now apparently we're going to start getting spiritualist empires that actually build temples and regular empires that are actually building holotheaters for amenities. The AI has also been given some support about setting up starbases. It's now going to make more use of hydroponic starbase building. That's a really key building actually. In this current version of the game, a lot of your food, you can get it through a hydroponics bay, not just in one starbase, but in 6 or 7 across your empire. Especially in the early game, that can generally be enough food for all of your population, meaning you don't need to build more food districts outside of the ones already in place on your capital. And they look forward to adding more improvements to AI in the future. So what do I really think about this? Well, I think this is definitely good steps in the right direction. You know, if something's broken, they should fix it. Absolutely. I was hoping, and I really was hoping quite a lot, that they were going to go and get some inspiration from something like StarNet, which is quite a well-functioning AI mod that's out there. And there are some other mods as well for the AI. It doesn't sound like they're going to be doing that, which I think is a shame. There's a lot of things they could have taken from the modding community and implemented into the base game to improve the game. This sounds like they're going in a different direction. If they make great improvements, I don't see that as a problem, but we'll just have to see what happens.